Hello, my name is Eireene and I'm going to read you a story called Faith. They talked with the illness and checked the infection count several times a day. Even so, they did not believe in the nearness of dying or the discomfort said to come when one could not breathe. Sirens could be heard more frequently. They'd taken to locking the outside door, which thieves used to stealing from tourists might try. Aside from that, they went on tweeting and liking and staring at screens, occasionally stopping to do things like deliver fabric to those who still knew how to sew. Supply chains shivered. Governments became tangled up in their own mistakes. Well, the nurses say it's more comfortable without masks, Dr. Tushin said with a dry laugh. But quickly he realized the joke had not come off. Elastic for around the ears was wanting. Refrigerator cars now stored human meat. Parks turned into graveyards. People were told to have faith in things as innocent as soap, but many kept looking into their cupboards and assessing the toilet paper storage space. Soviet crises made them nervous at the sight of empty shelves. The enemy, meanwhile, advanced in invisible clouds whose progress might take weeks to track. Videos of sticky paint tried to explain the enemy's movements. Even with gloves, the disease could spread from hands to phones to face. Peeling an orange, Dr. Tushin said, and smelling how the fragrance spreads can help you imagine the size of a speaking person's droplet cloud. But many could no longer smell. Those who could shook their heads. The image of an orange was an image of health and the lost days when they could gather with friends. If we start reasoning about everything, there'll be nothing sacred left, someone said, advocating for a prayer meeting at a local church. They spoke of herd immunity, but Dr. Tushin said Easter celebrations had better weight. Instead, a bishop buckled himself into an airplane seat and flew over New Orleans, just as George Bush had done during the hurricane. The bishop dropped holy water down on the city. That was what everyone wanted, wasn't it? To be known again as innocent lambs mingling together as they grazed. That is why they accepted the long days alone, despite their disbelief. They'd become a herd, and curves were what they had best be watching. Tendencies. They put their faith in statistics and watched the numbers, trying not to pine for the faces they longed so much to kiss. In my academic work, I have a lot to say about the role of the imagination in drawing up potentials in our material conditions, as well as about how trigger words invoke real neurological responses. I teach classes about language's power to name invisible forces and identify heroes and villains in our changing times. So I definitely believe writing is important. However, when someone is murdered in public by a government police officer paid to protect the community, that requires an immediate physical response of a writer getting out into the streets just like anyone else. Amiri Baraka knew that. To address the question of whether and how writing matters, I want to read you one of his poems. Baraka was a community organizer as well as a great poet, and while I'm sure that my mashup distorts his complex feelings, I hope you'll see how his poem slides in and out of sarcasm on the question of whether and how words matter. His poem is called Ophonic. Poems are bullshit unless they are teeth or trees or lemons piled on a step. Fuck poems, and they are useful, but they shoot, come at you, love what you are, breathe like wrestlers, or shudder strangely after pissing. We want live words of the hip world, live flesh and coursing blood, hearts, brains, souls splintering fire. We want poems like fist beating, dagger poems, poems that kill, assassin poems, poems that shoot, guns. So Baraka is here referencing another poet, Jack Spicer. He's referencing Lorca, and they all want words to be as real as lemons. But Baraka adds a bit of snark to the question of whether words can or should be that real. Elsewhere he says, "Don't wait for the devil. Do it yourself. Do it now." And here, the devil may be the slowness of art and writing.
I'm Sofie YT. I'm a former fiction fellow of the Elizabeth Kostova Foundation for Creative Writing, and for Alone Together, during this pandemic, I will read the poem Mother Does My Horoscope in the Morning. There is some pressure on your emotions today, Cancer, which might leave you feeling like a pot of boiling water. There is a lid on things, and highly likely indeed are you to heat up faster in these circumstances even than normal. So do please try to hold your temper, O Cancer. Rage will get you nowhere. Take care instead of your investments on this day. Great care of your long-term security, Cancer. However counternatural for you, the day is good for getting your material affairs. However counternatural in order, please, Cancer. I think only of your well-being. Major change is at hand, and most nights I hardly sleep. Okay. And I am answering a question by another Alone Together contributor, Eireene Neeland. And the question is, you're Belgian, but you write in English. Please explain. And has your relation to language changed during the pandemic? This is a killer question. I love it. Yes, I write in English. Well, I also write in English. I also write in Dutch, which is supposed to be my mother tongue. It's a little more complicated than that, but we will get to this hopefully in the course of this short video. So yeah, why write in English? I never intended to, but like all good stories, this one starts with, one day I was really hungover. And I was, and I had actually been forcing myself to write in Dutch always, because I thought, you know, I don't get to choose, you know, that's my mother tongue. You can never have this kind of sensibility in a different language. And then I was really hungover and I thought, okay, just these couple sentences and then, you know, I'll switch back to Dutch, and that never really happened. And somehow all of a sudden I had this whole story in English and I didn't really know what to do with it. And I had it read by people, and they were like, yeah, that works, you know. So I was like, okay, what do I do now? Well, you know, maybe I'll continue. And then, of course, I started thinking about why that's comfortable for me and why I feel like I have enough of a grasp of the language to actually do that. And I think the language is, the reason is just that I acquired the language in early childhood, just because of influence of American culture in Flanders, which is a Dutch-speaking part of Belgium. So like there were all these songs on the radio all the time, and there were especially all these TV shows and all these films on TV in English, you know, that came from the US, and we don't dub anything in Flanders. So like I just, you know, at this age where you soak it up like a sponge, I think that's what I did. And so it somehow feels comfortable. What is a little less comfortable sometimes is giving myself permission to write in English, which brings me actually to the second part of your question, which was, has your relation to language changed during the pandemic? Actually, yes. I mean, in the sense that I've been thinking about it a lot more, and this has to do not so much with the pandemic actually, but with the fact that I'm at this international residency right now for 6 months, and there's like somehow there's artists and writers here from all different corners of the world, and that has kind of that has made me think about a lot of things because of two reasons. One is that we have these writers here from different places in the world who are often in these very complicated multilingual situations that have to do with migration, have to do with exile also sometimes, have to do with being a refugee and so on. That's one. And then there was the fact also that I've never been so immersed in an artist community. So not just writers, but artists from everywhere as well. And I see how easily they use a language that is not their mother tongue in their work. Now, of course, that has to do with the fact that, I mean, for us writers, the material that we work with is language. So, like, we seem to have this, like, sacred notion of the mother tongue, which is something that I mean, the idea of the writer is that the writer writes in, her mother tongue, which, what is that? Say that your mother tongue is English, is that, what English is that? Is there just one English? Is it that simple? And that's just the beginning of that question, right? Then there's multilingual situations in other senses as well that have to do with migration, that have to do with cultural influence, have to do with linguistic influences of all kinds. I mean, so that's been another thing, like thinking about, okay, so all these other artists, like they're making videos, for instance, and they just like, they have that text in English, they don't think twice about it. And here I am being all uncomfortable about giving myself permission to do this. And so that made me think a lot about it. And I'm still in the process of doing that. And I'm very interested, or I became very interested in this problematic idea of a mother tongue in this world that I think is more characterized by migration, by cultural influence, by linguistic influence than most of us care to admit. And so it seems to be a world in which actually multilingualism, translingualism are in fact just so much more common than we tend to sort of assume in the literature world, where we think of the writer always as somebody writing in her or his mother tongue, or in which you have to translate into your mother tongue. It's another one of these sacred things. Like, you cannot translate from your mother tongue into something else. And I think that this is a very interesting thing to think about, especially in a time when we are trying to somehow map the consequences of colonization, of cultural imperialism, right? This is where English comes in. It's a very complicated question, I think, of diasporas, different forms of migration in literature. And also, we talk a lot about world literature nowadays. What is that? We're kind of like, can we even use that term? What is that term? So, like, we're trying to figure out a lot of these things right now, I think, and I think it might be a good time to sort of debunk the notion of mother tongue in the process of doing that. This mythical almost idea of this one native language that every author is supposed to be writing in, and this established image of like the mother tongue writer, so that's like a local thing. It's a monocultural, monolinguistic, as I said, kind of like a native thing, this nativist idea that in many cases just does not apply. And one of the things that I realized is that actually writing in Dutch is kind of the same as writing in English for me, and that has to do with the fact that my mother tongue is my dialect, and my dialect is notoriously different from the Dutch language. Plus, there's like a history of the Dutch language in my country that is kind of, I mean, it's kind of complicated in a way. Like, the country was dominated by French for a long time, and so like using Dutch language as a cultural language, it's a relatively new thing in Belgium, and there's a general unease with it. So like all these language things, so interesting. I started to think about these things during the pandemic, and I hope that answers your question. All right.